I want to be seen for what I am. I want to be seen as a philosopher. I want to be seen as someone wise, intelligent. I want to be seen as a hard worker. Socrates was perfectly content with being overlooked. It's okay. People don't have to recognize what I am or who I am. It's okay. Never call yourself a philosopher and do not talk a great deal among non philosophers about philosophical propositions, but do what follows from them. For example, at a banquet, do not say how a person ought to eat, but eat as a person ought to. Remember that Socrates had so completely put aside ostentation that people actually went to him when they wanted to be introduced to philosophers, and he took them. He was that tolerant of being overlooked. And if talk about philosophical propositions arises among non philosophers, for the most part be silent, since there is a great danger of your spewing out what you have not digested. And when someone says to you that you know nothing and you are not hurt by it, then you know that you are making a start at your task. Sheep do not show how much they have eaten by bringing the feed to the shepherds, but they digest the food inside themselves, and outside themselves they bear wool and milk. So in your case, likewise, do not display propositions to non philosophers, but instead the actions that come from the propositions when they are digested. The Handbook of Epictetus, paragraph 46. The one thing, not the only thing, but a thing I love about Epictetus is his down to earth practicality. I mean, give me something more practical than that. He's talking about situations, social environments, where you're out in public and you're dealing with people and how you should conduct yourself. And so let's break this down because there's a lot of wisdom here. Opening line: never call yourself a philosopher, and do not talk a great deal among non philosophers about philosophical propositions, but do what follows from them. It almost seems like there's this narcissism sometimes when it comes to philosophy and self improvement, self help. You probably see this more from the self improvement world, but there's this idea that, oh, look at me, I am so evolved. Now, a true philosopher would not feel that way. A true philosopher sees their own shortcomings and poor behavior. They don't focus on the good. They focus on where they need to develop. So, never calling yourself a philosopher, it might seem a little bit like, okay, well, that's just who I am. That's just what I am. But it's kind of like saying, hey, I'm a good person. I think nobody really should say that. Even the good person shouldn't say that. And so when you say, oh, I'm a philosopher, it's like, okay, you're someone who thinks a lot about things and you try and do the right thing and you develop. Like most people don't even know what that means. However, it's one of those phrases that, in a sense, comes off as a bit braggy. Now, you could say, of course, if you're among, let's say, philosophy professors, maybe you might say, hey, I study philosophy. That's a good way of saying it. But that line, there's so much humility in that, and there's so much awareness, self awareness. Never call yourself a philosopher. So don't brag about your position because it's not like saying I am an engineer or I am a teacher. That's a factual thing. When you say I am a philosopher, you're sort of elevating yourself in a way that's rather arbitrary. Like, what does it really mean to be a philosopher? Everybody thinks about self improvement to some degree. It might be very, very small, it might be a lot, but to some degree. So, moral of the story is be careful what you are claiming to be. You could say I study philosophy, but to call yourself a philosopher, it might not be the best thing. He also says, do not talk a great deal among non philosophers about philosophical propositions. There's this line in the Bible, something like, do not cast pearls before swine. Basically, what that means is if people aren't concerned or interested in listening to you, just don't talk about it. Just don't talk about it. Don't bring up philosophy to someone who clearly just doesn't care. It's okay. That doesn't mean that you judge them and you think you're better than them. Quite the contrary. But what it means is that there's no sense in you talking about philosophy among people who really don't care about philosophy. Now, he goes on to say about this idea of not claiming to be a philosopher. He mentions Socrates and how people would actually come to him to seek things out because he wouldn't show that he's a philosopher. He wouldn't say it. He just acted it, and people who knew it, and they would come to him and ask. In the same way as if you're a really wise, intelligent person, you don't need to go out onto the streets and preach your word, and you don't need to bring this up in every conversation. What you'll find is that people will come to you when they think you can help them. And so all you can do is really just act appropriately in the world based on what you know, and people will gravitate towards you who need your assistance. It's the same way at work. The more useful you make yourself and competent you make yourself at work, the more likely people will come to you and ask you questions and ask you for help. But that doesn't mean that you run around the office forcing your help onto people. That's not a Stoic thing. Hey there. Let me thank you for being a listener to this ad-free podcast. If you enjoy the podcast, there are a few things you can do to help me out. A 5-star review on Spotify or wherever you're listening to this really does help, and it's free. You can also sign up for my Substack newsletter or Patreon. Substack free gets each episode emailed to you along with the transcripts in the form of an article. You'll also get access to my live talks, followed by a Q&A afterward. Substack Premium supporters and my patrons on Patreon get access to the recordings and a brief article of those Q&A sessions, access to full episodes of the Paradoxically Speaking podcast, my Steps to Success interview series, Stoic meditations, and much more. Links to Substack and Patreon can be found in the show notes. And so this line I really like. He was that tolerant of being overlooked. Man, how often does our ego tell ourselves, we say, I want to be seen for what I am. I want to be seen as a philosopher. I want to be seen as someone wise, intelligent. I want to be seen as a hard worker. Socrates was perfectly content with being overlooked. It's okay. People don't have to recognize what I am or who I am. It's okay. I love that line. He was that tolerant of being overlooked. Man, talk about humility. And then he goes on to talk about how if talk about philosophical propositions arises among non-philosophers, for the most part, be silent, since there is a great danger of your spewing out what you have not digested. So if you're in a social setting and you're talking with people that don't really think too deeply on things, they're not philosophers, don't voice an opinion when they bring something up. Certainly don't say don't, but be careful on how you do it. So if somebody brings up, I don't know, let's say they bring up a reference to the dichotomy of control. They say, well, that's outside of my control. You don't need to engage in that conversation and bring it really deep. That could be something that just they said and they believe it, but you don't really need to dig deep into it. I'll give you a better example. When people say it is what it is. So let's take that situation. You're at work, something bad happens. One of your colleagues says, it is what it is. That does not give you the right to go into, well, that's really a reference to the dichotomy of control. The Stoics thought about this for a very long time, and you have the dichotomy of control, that which is up to you, that which is not up to you. And really, when you say it is what it is, you're kind of reflecting on that. It's like, no, you don't need to go into that. In fact, you shouldn't. That's what Epictetus is saying here. You shouldn't. A, because it's inappropriate socially, and B, because, as he says, there's a great danger that you say something that you don't really fully understand. Because you're in such a position to spiel and to talk about a particular thing, there's a great danger that you might actually say something that is not right. And so be very careful. That doesn't mean that you fail to engage with people who want to talk about philosophy. Again, we're talking about non-philosophers, as Epictetus says, which is really people who, like, yeah, they might say wise things and maybe they're developing in some way, but for the most part, they don't really care. Like, there's a lot of people. I know it might shock you to know this, but there are a lot of people out there that just don't care about philosophy. They don't care about self-improvement. They don't care about self-help. And it's inappropriate for you to force that onto someone, to force that conversation onto someone. I really like this example he gives here. So, first, let me go on. And when someone says to you that you know nothing and you are not hurt by it, then you know that you are making a start at your task. That is progress right there. When someone attacks your ego, when they say you don't know what you're doing, when they call you stupid, and you're just not hurt by it, that's progress right there. But let's go into this example he gives. Sheep do not show how much they have eaten by bringing the feed to the shepherds, but they digest the food inside themselves, and outside themselves they bear wool and milk. So, in your case, likewise, do not display propositions to non philosophers, but instead the actions that come from the propositions when they are digested. This simply means actions speak louder than words. That example of a sheep, the analogy of a sheep. A sheep eats food, drinks water, and will sprout out wool, and they will produce milk. They don't need to go to the farmer and say, hey, look at this food I'm digesting. Look at this water I'm drinking. And you're going to see the fruits of my labor. No, they just do what they got to do. And then they have wool and milk. What this means is that you don't need to display anything verbally. You don't need to show everyone. You don't need to show up to a party with your little Epictetus handbook and in your back pocket and whip it out and reference things. You don't need to show that. You don't need to tell people, hey, I'm listening to the Strong Stoic podcast, which is a really great podcast. You don't need to say those things. If it comes up in conversation, feel it out. If it's socially appropriate, do it, yes. But the point Epictetus is making here, again, particularly to non-philosophers, is that the right way to show that is through your actions. And so what does this mean? This means you don't need to preach to people what the dichotomy of control is. What you can do is when something comes up that's not up to you, you don't react to it. You manage it properly. In other words, the best way to show non-philosophers the benefits of philosophy is simply by acting in the way that philosophy teaches. Don't do things for show. Show it through your actions. That's the most important thing. So in your case, likewise, do not display propositions to non-philosophers, but instead the actions that come from the propositions when they are digested. Just like that sheep that digests the food and drinks the water and produces wool and produces milk, you digest philosophy, understand the benefits, understand Stoic philosophy, put it into practice, and the world will see that, accept it, and become a better place because of it.